Hi souls, welcome to my channel where hobbies gonna die. Today we are going to be doing the top books of 2024. I'll have these broken down into categories, so if you are only interested in a certain genre, you'll see them down below. I read 71 books last year, just shy of my 75 book goal, and 21 of them were my favorite. I say 21, but they're smashed into series because there's a few series that I'm going to be talking about in this, so technically probably more than that. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. We'll start with poetry, and I read a couple of poetry books last year, but the one that stood out to me the most was this one, The Spell of the Yukon and Other Poems by Robert Service. This is the first time I've ever read anything by Robert Service, and I love it. And I'm glad that we have like this really thick book of Robert Service's stuff. This is just like a little small selection of his stuff. I'm glad that we have it because I really want to dive into more of his poetry. His type of poetry is the poetry that I always gravitate toward, and it's that, I don't know the technical term for it, but it's that lyrical, like rhyming, it rhymes every other or every word of the verse. That's the type of poetry that I like. I don't know, I just like the rhythm that a rhyming poem gives, unlike another poem type. He does have a few in here that don't rhyme. That was a little hard for me because I don't know, I guess the reason why I like rhyming poetry is because my brain tries to put lyricism to the poems, and I try to read it in a way that's very lyrical, and sometimes it's really hard to do if it's not a rhyming poem for me. I don't know why. But yeah, this is a really, really good selection of poems by Robert Service. So if you are interested in diving in, I would suggest, my cat is playing in the background. I would suggest a small selection like this. This one is by Dover Publications, so you might be able to find this one in particular, but if not, just find like a small selection. Hello, baby. Are you here now? Also, at least for that collection, Robert Service's type is very bleak and melancholy and morbid, which is another thing that I really like about poems. I mean, I like the happy stuff too, and the nature-y stuff, which a lot of Robert Service's stuff is also nature related too. So if you really like melancholy type of work or nature type of work, you'll really like Robert Service. Moving on from poetry, let's talk about classics. 2024 was the start of me finally diving into classics, and every single one of them that I've read, I liked, which are all on this list now. They're all gothic horrors. I guess I just like gothic horrors, or I just got lucky with my picks as to what I read this year for classics. We'll start with the big one, Dracula. I love this edition of Dracula. We have another edition of Dracula too, but this one is the one that I read from and what I enjoy. It's illustrated by Edward Gorey, which is also an illustrator that I really enjoy, so I enjoyed seeing the illustrations in here. But yeah, Dracula, I mean, come on, definitely up there with one of my favorites. I will admit that after a while it got a little tedious for me to read. Classics in general are a little tedious for me to read. I don't have the best reading comprehension, so when it comes to classics it's a little difficult, and this one did get to me, so I did in the middle of this find an audiobook version and just read along with it. Personally, it wasn't an issue with Bram Stoker being a bad writer, it was just me struggling with reading, especially the accent with Van Helsing. I can't remember if I gave it 5 stars or 4.5 stars, but either way, I did have a problem with this, and I just felt like the ending just fell flat. I don't want to spoil or anything if you've not read this. It's just when the ending happened, I was just like, that's it. But beyond that, I did really like this classic, and I would actually recommend that you pick it up, especially since Nosferatu came out. Definitely pick up the source and read it. Of course, I think there's is there a Nosferatu book too? Because I could have sworn I heard someone say that they finished reading Nosferatu. And I don't know if that's because there's a book that's actually called Nosferatu or if it's Dracula. The next classic we'll talk about is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is actually, of the 3 that I'm talking about, this is probably number 1 of those 3. If I were to rank these, I'm not ranking these, by the way. These are just thrown into categories. But I would say that I feel like this is probably my favorite a little bit more than Dracula because it had less of an issue with me, whereas the ending of Dracula was a little frustrating. I really loved Mary Shelley's poetic prose. This is actually a classic that I was actually able to read through without an audiobook, so that's also good. That means that Mary Shelley was easy for me to read. I mean, there are moments in this that it was hard for me to comprehend too, but like I said, classic is a little difficult for me to read, but it was a little bit more easier than Dracula was. This was definitely a train wreck of a toxic relationship between the doctor and the monster. I know a lot of people sympathize with the monster, and I did for a little bit, and then there was a moment where I was like, okay, I no longer feel sympathy for the monster. Also, the beginning of my version, which is a Barnes & Noble version, I don't know how old this one is. But anyways, the beginning of it, there's an author who talks about, as most of these editions usually do, they talk about the book first, which I always find fascinating when it comes to classics. In that little thing that I read, they had mentioned that this is often used to study and it's often being interpreted in different ways. I find that fascinating. Learning that and knowing that, I was able to think about the different interpretations that people go with for Frankenstein as I read it. And I was like, I can see that. It's just a little fascinating little tidbit there. There is one where they think that the monster is a figment of the doctor's imagination. Granted, there are a few clues in the story that makes it obvious that it's not a figment of his imagination, but it's still a fascinating interpretation. And there's several of them like that. Several interpretations of this that I just find really fascinating. And then the last one we will talk about is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This would have been a favorite of mine if it wasn't for that infamous chapter 11 that I've talked about before. It frustrates the hell out of me that that chapter is in it. It should have been edited out. But beyond that, I really did like this book. Oscar writes beautifully. Again, I like Oscar Wilde's writing, much like I like Mary Shelley's writing. I mean, Bram Stoker I do like as well, but it's the whole poetic prose floweriness that Oscar Wilde and Mary Shelley both do. I just really, really appreciate. It definitely painted the picture a lot. I was able to sit there and enjoy even the downtime where they're just describing the scenery around them and stuff. I really appreciated that because of the way that they wrote it. I don't know, very artistic, very artful. If it was not for chapter 11, I probably would have liked this more than Frankenstein. Maybe. I don't know. I would recommend all three of them if you're into classics and gothic horror, or you want to dive into classics and gothic horror. I would definitely recommend all three of those. And that wraps up classics. So we'll dive now into romance. Now, the one that I'm going to be talking about is a duology, and I technically read The Crow Lord last year. I finished the duology with The Sunchild this year, so I want to talk about the series as a whole, the duology as a whole. Definitely going to reread at some point. I really love this duology. It is in the dark romance kind of realm because the setting is very tragic, gothic horror type setting. It is vampires. The main romance is a vampire and a human. It is very grumpy sunshine. It was a mix of what I loved. It's the dark and gritty setting and atmosphere, but you have the wholesomeness of a romance that's a budding romance that grows between the two duologies. It is a spicy romance, by the way, so there are definitely some smut scenes in there, just to let you know. J.M. Faraday is definitely an auto-buy author for me. I have another of her books that I read, which was in my previous favorites of 2023, along with this one, and that is a young adult horror that I've mentioned before. She's coming up with another dark romance that I'm excited to read, so anything that she writes, I am going to be grabbing, because I really love her writing. Really love the stuff that she does. It's just like the vibes that she gives for each of her settings and everything is great. So recommend her. And if you don't like dark romance, I recommend you do the young adult horror because that one's good too. And then the next one that I'm going to talk about is another dark romance. I don't have the actual book that I read, but I have the second of them, because the one that I read is technically like a novella called The Dare by Harley Laroux. It's part of the Losers series that I have not started yet. Beyond that one It was one that I buddy read with my husband because my husband has read it himself first and then recommended I read it, and he wanted to read it again, so we both read it together. He's really into romances, spicy romances. It's awesome that I have a husband that's into that, so we can both read them. But yeah, really loved Harley LaRoe's writing. It's the whole cheerleader pop girl versus outcast type of thing. This is what this book is about, which I am normally not big into contemporary modern romances or whatever, so the fact that this caught my interest is a big deal. I will tell you, with either one of these romances that I just talked about, check your trigger warnings, because obviously there is going to be triggers. Both of them, like I said, are in the dark romance family, so a lot of dark stuff happens to one or both of the characters. Actually, this one is technically a reverse harem, so there's more than just two people in this one. So like I said, it was The Dare, which I'll pop up on the screen, that I read that I would recommend, and I'm excited to continue on with that story with Losers. The next category that we'll jump into is fantasy. I did not read a whole lot of fantasy. I read horror books that could jump into the fantasy realm. I'm hot. I shouldn't have worn this in the house. I just came back from a doctor's appointment, which is why I'm dressed right now. Anyways, so I didn't read a whole lot of fantasy books. I would very much like to dive into, at some point, more of the fantasy realm. But the one that I did read is The Color of Magic, The Start of Discworld by Terry Pratchett. Really loved this. First book that I read in 2024 and became my first 5-star. I really love Terry Pratchett's writing. It's very whimsical. So I am excited to read the rest of Discworld. Of course, Discworld is a big series, but this is definitely a very promising start of that series. It's definitely tongue-in-cheek, satirical type of fantasy. There's a lot of making fun of certain tropes in fantasy. This is definitely less serious. I mean, there are serious moments in this, but it's definitely very satirical. So if you don't like that kind of thing, then maybe avoid it. But if you like some humor to your fantasy, then I would recommend you pick this up. I mean, it's a pretty short book. Rincewind is the mage, the main character that you read in this one. I know the series kind of jumps around for different characters, but this one in particular is Rincewind. He goes on an adventure that he didn't necessarily want to go on, so he was complaining the entire time. And then you have like really interesting, dynamic, funny type of characters in this along with Rincewind. You have the luggage, which is what is on the cover right here, is luggage. Luggage doesn't actually look like this, but luggage was probably my favorite character of them. But yeah, I really would recommend that you pick this up and read it and continue with your Discworld journey. And then lastly, we have horror, which, as unsurprisingly, I've read a lot of. So because I read a lot of it, I'm going to break this down even further, starting with children horror and making our way to adult. And the two children horror books that I will be talking about are both Next in horror is young adult. I'm hoping I'm categorizing these correctly, by the way, because some of the ones that are considered young adult, I wouldn't recommend a teenager at least reading these. I wouldn't recommend that. You know, an actual young adult, an adult maybe, but there is some heavy stuff to some of these I'm about to talk about. The first one being Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews, which I don't have a physical copy of. I wish I did. I'm going to pick one up at some point. But yeah, really loved this book, but it was one of those books that will rip your heart out, stomp on it, get chewed up by a monster and spit back out. One of those type of stories. It was a very toxic relationship, a lot of crazy stuff going on. Bigotry was happening. A lot of triggering things were happening. There is LGBTQ rep in this, which is great. And this is another book that made me tear up, given everything that was happening with the characters. I had a long year of books that made me tear up, which doesn't usually happen. So yay for these books that actually made me feel emotional. This gave me dark academia vibes, but make it even more macabre and horror filled. And the reason why I put this in young adult category is because they're in a private school, and I don't remember if they are like senior year of private school, like high school level, so probably like 17, 18, or if they're in college level private school. I can't remember off the top of my head, but because of how young they are, that's the reason why I put them in young adult. But like I said, the topics were heavy. Next one I'm putting in young adult, but again, I'm not entirely sure if it should be going in young adult, is The Afterlife Experiment by Sam Weiss. The main character, she seems young to me. I cannot remember if the age was actually mentioned, but the main character was rather young seeming. You also follow along with another character that's adult. The topics in it are pretty heavy and stuff, so again, I don't know where this is supposed to land, but I'm putting it in young adult because the main character is young. This one made me speechless at the end. It didn't make me tear up, but it made me speechless at the end. It was very topsy-turvy, kind of like Alice in Wonderland, but make it even more twisted than Alice in Wonderland. The video game that's like the horror version of Alice in Wonderland, put it in that category. But it gave me that really topsy-turvy, what is going on. It can get confusing at times because of that. But if you keep following along with this twisted story, then everything starts to make sense as you get further on into the story. You start questioning the reality, though, because as the main character is escaping an asylum, so while she's questioning her sanity, you're also questioning your sanity and what's real and what isn't. Apparently, it's supposed to be a series, and I'm excited for that because I would like to know what is going to happen at the end of this book. So hoping that gets published at some point so I can pick it up, because Sam Weiss is a great author, and I'm really excited as to where this may go on from this point. Next up is the adult section, starting with Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triana. This is my first Triana book. It was crazy, and I'm wanting to read more from him, including the second. Apparently there's a second of this book, of this series, and I kind of curious as to what the heck he could continue with this book considering the ending of it, but you know, I guess I'll figure it out. This book I would not recommend if you do not like extreme horror, because this is an extreme horror book. I've warned about triggers in the other books that I've talked about. This has got even more triggers to it. The characters that you follow are all terrible people. You're not going to love any of these characters. You're just here to relatively enjoy the ride that they're going on, but they are all very, very terrible people. And I find that morbidly fascinating. That's the reason why I like picking up books like this that are about terrible people and watching them unfold, because I don't know, I like getting into their heads and like, why are you like this? You know, I don't know. I just like watching train wrecks happen. So that's the reason why I love this book, despite how god awful these people are. This is also a very bizarre type of setting, very bizarro. You get kind of confused as to what's going on, and then things start to make sense in a way, but still very bizarre as things unfold. But if you like extreme horror and weird stories about really terrible people, then maybe you'll be interested in this. But like I said, it is extreme horror. I've already warned you multiple times now, but still would recommend if you are into that. The next books I'll talk about, which I've done a video on them before, is The Spectral Inspector by Cooper S. Beckett. The entire series up to book 3. I have book 4 to read. It's not published yet. I have the ARC to read, but up until book 3, I would highly recommend that series. I am excited to read book 4. Cooper S. Beckett is a great writer, and as good as yet another person who's a train wreck. Of course, they're a train wreck that I actually am rooting for and hoping that things get better for them. It's paranormal / eldritch. Honestly, there are some eldritch elements to this, and that's all I'm going to say without spoiling more than that. But she's a paranormal investigator who bites off more than she can chew. That's a good round way to say what this is about. Really love it. Really love paranormal horror. Cannot wait for book 4. The next one that I am going to talk about, I'm putting in adult despite the main characters are young, but given there's so many point of views with this book, this series, I'm going to put it in adult because the content in it is definitely more adult. And that is A Winter for Dove, Part 1 and 2 by Nicholas J. Ripley. So I just did a video about this one again, so I won't talk a whole lot about it. in this video. I will say that the series is definitely captured me. I am so excited for more for Project Suncloud because there's a lot going on in the first 2 books. This seems to be the theme of my books. They're very heavy, very trigger heavy. There's a lot of adult content and everything else. That's the reason why I'm putting this in the adult section despite the main characters being younger. So just a heads up there, but this is a post-apocalyptic dystopian world. There's mutants and zombie type characters. And despite it being more sci-fi related, it kind of reminds me of an urban fantasy because it's 2057, I think it's set in, so it's slightly beyond our own year, but it was modern enough to kind of give that urban fantasy vibe. So urban sci-fi, I guess? Question mark? I don't know if urban sci-fi is an actual thing, but it definitely gave me those vibes. So would definitely recommend that series as well. And then the next category we have are short stories, starting with Courier by Zoe Rossi. I don't know how to say her name, but Courier was very impactful for a short story. I was kind of iffy about the writing style because it's an IU format. It started out as I in the beginning and then it changes to you. When I started to get used to it, I realized the reason for that writing style is to make it more impactful and more putting you in the story, and it definitely did that. And it made it even creepier because of that. Because the Courier is about some very obsessive courier stalking one of his people that he delivers to. So if you like You, that TV series, which I know is also a book, I don't know if You is the name of the book as well, but the TV series You about the stalker librarian and stuff, very, very similar. So if you like those type of books or movies or TV series or whatever, to definitely pick this up because it is a short story, very quick read, but very impactful. Really liked it. And then the next short stories I'm talking about is AC Crown, literally all 3 of his stories. Again, I've talked about this in a very recent video, so I won't talk about it too much. Besides, you should definitely look up AC Crown and his short stories. They are all great. It's very well written, very impactful for being so short. One of them literally is just 19 pages and it's still packed a punch. One of them is a gothic horror, one of them is more horror thriller, and one of them is a paranormal horror haunting of a family with ghosts and stuff. So definitely jumps around between the different genres, which I love. I love that the author jumps around between the different genres, so I applaud him for that. Again, highly recommend his books. All of them are great. And then lastly of the short stories is The Dead Spot by Angela Sylvain. So this is a short story collection by Angela Sylvain. The extended title of this is Stories of Lost Girls. So they're all related to women and girls getting into some very terrible situations, to be honest. This will make you cry. There's a lot of tragic situations that these people get into. There's also revenge stories in this too, all horror related, but there are some very tragic stories in this. Just to let you know, there's some heavy topics there, but they're all great. They're all very well written. They're all definitely hit you in the feels. I've always complained about the short stories being too short and I want more. But these are actually wrapped in a way that are very satisfying. And I mean, obviously I would like more from Angela Sylvain, and thankfully I have a couple of her other books I can read. But as far as short stories, they're definitely satisfying endings. Even if they were vague endings, they were satisfying enough for me to go, okay, that's the end of the story. Great. Move on to the next one. Highly recommend the Dead Spot. And the last of the categories is graphic novels for horror, and the only one I really read was Mercy, The Fair Lady, The Frost, and The Fiend by Mirka and Dolfo. This was more of a honorable mention because despite really liking the illustration and stuff, by the way, Mirka and Dolfo was the writer and the illustrator and the colorist. I mean, there were several other colorists as well, but they definitely had their hand in all 3 of those. But the art was great, and the story, the atmosphere and stuff was really great, but I felt like the ending was really rushed. I feel like that the graphic novel needed a few more panels to kind of slow down the ending for me to really, really like it. But it was enough for me to mention this because it is overall really great. It's Victorian era type of eldritch horror. Definitely recommend if you would like a horror graphic novel to pick up. It's a short comic, it's a 1 through 6, so you can just get the collection, which I would like to get for my graphic novel collection. And that's it. That is all of my favorites for 2024. Wait, hold the phone. I'm coming to you with my pajamas on, my hair oily because I'm doing an oil treatment before I do my shower, because I realized I missed a few books in that favorite list. Blame the fact that I am going through medical treatments and everything else. At the same time, I'm trying to make lists and stuff at the end of the year of who my favorites are. I read a ton of books, so of course a few have gone through the cracks. And as I was editing out one guy, I was going through my list again on Goodreads and realized I had 3 other books I could have mentioned in this video. So we're going to talk about them as soon as I breathe and calm down and sit down and chill. Hold on a second. Okay, I'm back with my notes. I have double checked to make sure that I have all the books now for this list, and these are the last 3. All 3 of these are considered horror, by the way, so it'll make sense to be at the end of the video since the end of the video was horror. But the first book is a anthology called Book of Monster Stories, published by the Horror Zine. So this was like multiple authors who wrote these stories. Cannot believe I forgot about this one. It was in my 4-star section, but honestly it should probably be in the 4.5-star section because there is a lot of stories in this that still live rent-free in my head. Literally, there is some really horrifying, gross stories that still give me the heebie-jeebies when I think about them, and I don't know why I didn't think about this book while I was going through the list. I don't know why, but you should definitely check it out. It was 31 stories in all, and I do believe like 21 of them, a good bit of them were like 4 stars or above, and then 8 stories of those were like 5 stars for me. It's a good book of stories if you like monster horror. A lot of them are creepy crawly bug type stories. There's triggers beyond belief. There's some horrifying pet deaths in it, and just to let you know, there's some crazy stuff. And then the next book I wanted to talk about is Umbrate by A.D. Jones. It does need some polishing and editing, but overall it was still a really good book. It's considered urban fantasy, but a crime thriller. It's following a detective who is solving a very horrifying crime. It is slow in the beginning, but once it picks up and everything else, it starts getting really good. It's a debut novel, so I'm really interested because I do believe it's a series, so I'm really interested in how this continues on and how stronger the writer gets with his writing. So definitely check that one out if you're really big into urban fantasy and crime thrillers, and like it was a gruesome crime that he was solving. So horror, thriller, crime thriller, where you want to throw that book in. And then the last one, I do not understand why I forgot about. I literally have a copy of it. And it is Nightmares from the Grey by Joey Powell, if I can hold it correctly. Why did I forget about this one? This is a really good book. Like, one of these books that I rated 4 stars, and then I went back and like changed to 4.5 stars because I sat there and was like, why am I nitpicking this? Were there some flaws? Yeah, but you know, no one's perfect. This book is really good, and I do not understand why of all 3 of these books that I forgot about, this one was among them. I don't know. It's a young adult horror. It's very similar to like the same kind of genre as Stranger Things or It, or you know, where a band of teenagers come together to fight a supernatural entity type of thing. It's kind of that same realm. You kind of want to listen to heavy metal while you're reading this. It's kind of like a heavy metal ballad. It's really good. I don't blame the chaos and scatterbrain that I am right now for forgetting about this one. I am so sorry. But yeah, definitely check this one out if you're into those kind of books. And that is all of them. That is it. That completes the list. So you can go back to watching me actually dressed without oily hair and stuff close out the video. I don't have all of them as physical copies, but I'm definitely going to pick up quite a few of these as physical copies because I like them so much. I don't know if they're going to be reread, but I want them in my collection because that is part of the hobby. Trophies. I cannot believe I had so many books that I really liked that year. Here's to a new year. Here's hoping that I have that many books this year. I'm trying to get back into reading again. I kind of stalled the last half of 2024 for obvious reasons, but I'm back to it. I'm reading a lot more, so I'm excited for this year to see what favorites I talk about in the next one of these. Give this video a like, subscribe for more content like this, and comment down below how many 5 stars did you have last year, or favorites. How many favorites? I guess they wouldn't necessarily have to be 5 stars, but how many of them did you have last year? Until next time, bye souls.